Hello everyone, my name is Dara Rath and I'm the pastor at Faith Lutheran Church in Port Elgin. And each week I bring you a message written by different authors. Some of those messages are funny, some of them are meaningful, and they take about 5 minutes to watch. And so this week I'm actually going to read a couple of comical stories, and they're actually the incidents during which these comical stories take place is really not a funny thing at all. In fact, it happens during 9/11 when all of the flights landed in Gander, and 6,132 passengers were on 38 flights that landed there when this crisis was happening in the United States. But during that time, there were these funny stories that happened, and it's from a book called The Day the World Came to Town by Jim DeFeed. And so there's a couple of stories in here from that time in history. Over in Glenwood, a speck of a town east of Gander and just across the river from Appleton, Janet Shaw volunteered for the grave ride shift at the Salvation Army Church. There were about 50 passengers sleeping on mattresses on the church floor, and Shaw was there in case someone needed something during the night. She was happy to volunteer. She'd already opened her home and allowed anyone who wanted to clean up to come over and use her shower. The hard part, she soon realized, was keeping enough clean towels on hand. For 2 days, her washer and dryer seemed to be in constant use. Sitting in the darkened church, she was happy for the peace and quiet. Most of the passengers assigned to stay in the church were asleep by midnight, but she knew that a few of the men had gone down to the Moosehead Lounge for something to drink. She would have been able to get a little sleep herself if it hadn't been for the telephone ringing. Every hour a woman called looking for her son, Bill Fitzpatrick. She'd been told he was staying at the church. After gently waking all the men in the church to see if they were Fitzpatrick, Shaw realized he must have been one of the guys who was gone down to the pub. She called down to the Moosehead and had Fitzpatrick paged, but no one answered. Finally, around 3 a.m., Fitzpatrick arrived at the church. As soon as Shaw heard the door open, the 64-year-old woman pounced. "And just where have you been?" she scolded. She didn't even give him a chance to answer. "And who do you think you are, keeping me up half the night talking to your mother? Did you ever realize your mother was worried about you?" As Shaw berated him, the 38-year-old Fitzpatrick just stood there with his head hanging low. For those inside the church, it was a marvelous show. Here was this little old woman scolding this fellow, who must have been at least a foot taller. As they like to say in these parts of Newfoundland, she was giving him the devil. "Now, you go and give your mother a call." And she wrapped up, "Right now, and do it." As Fitzpatrick skulked away, several of the other passengers stood and applauded. So that's one comical story from Gander. And here's the second one. I think you'll enjoy this one. After working 38 hours without any sleep, Gary Vay was beat. The president and chief executive officer of the Gander International Airport Authority, he is the man in charge of the airport. Unfortunately, on September the 11th, Vay wasn't in Gander. He was attending an international conference of airport leaders in Montreal. Ironically, one of the main topics that had been discussed was airport security. The images of planes being used as weapons left everyone at the conference sickened. And with airspace closed over all of North America, they were stranded at a time when their own airports were dealing with an unprecedented crisis. Rather than waiting for airspace to open so he could fly back to Gander, they rented a car and drove more than 600 miles to the eastern edge of Nova Scotia, where he caught a ferry for a 6-hour boat ride across Cabot Strait to the Newfoundland town of Port aux Basques. From there, he had an 8-hour drive to Gander. He drove straight to the airport, and when he arrived Wednesday afternoon, he was proud to see how well his staff, and for that matter the entire town, had responded to this emergency. His second-in-command, Jeff Tucker, was running the airport's command center and dealing with all the airlines. They left Tucker in charge of the command center while he dealt with other problems as they came up. By about 4 o'clock in the morning, however, he was starting to wear down. He decided to go home, shower, and catch a couple of hours sleep before returning to the terminal to handle the next crisis. Not wanting to wake his wife, he quietly showered in the hallway bathroom and decided to sleep in their guest bedroom. The room was dark as he dropped his towel and climbed into bed, wearing nothing more than wet hair and a weary expression on his face. And that's when he realized he wasn't alone. He was in bed with a 70-year-old woman from Fort Worth, Texas, whom Vay's wife Patsy had befriended at one of the shelters and decided to take her home. Remarkably, the woman was still asleep. Vay gingerly stood up, covered himself with his towel, and retreated to his own bedroom. "We've got company, I see," he told his wife when they both woke up in the next morning. "Yes," she said, "there's a lovely lady from one of the flights." She told her husband she couldn't stand the thought of this old woman spending a night sleeping on the floor of a classroom at Gander Academy. So she brought her home and tried to show her a very good time. "Well," he said with a laugh, he almost showed her more than that. Now there's a comical story during a time that was really a crisis in our world. So I hope you enjoyed those stories, and thanks for taking 5.